I'm joined now by Ciara Lewis from For Our Future's Sake, a group of students and young people from across the UK who are working to stop Brexit. Ciara, how are you?
Hello, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, not bad. Now, all the pro-Europeans have been on the TV and radio today saying that in fact Remain won. If you won the European elections, why are you looking so miserable?
Well, I mean, I'm not looking miserable today because, to me, this is really something we need to look at holistically. If we take a look at the voting system, which, of course, we only used to haunt for the European elections, we can only compare it to 2014, then really, if we look at the five firmly pro-People's Vote parties, the Lib Dems, Green, SNP, Change and Plaid Cymru, we won 40% of the vote compared to 35% for those no-deal backing Brexit parties and UKIP. Frankly,
but Ciara, hang on a second. When you quote that statistic, there's a couple of problems with that. Point number one, this was an election, not a referendum. Point number two, you're not including the Conservatives who say that they want to leave the EU. And point number three, the voters from the European elections included EU nationals who can't vote in a referendum. So actually, in truth, you're lost.
Well, I disagree with that. To me, the narrative this was driven by in this country is that it was about Brexit. Now, in the Labour Party, we tried to move away from that. We tried to say, this was an election. Let's talk about the makeup of the European Parliament. But ultimately, we are so ingrained in this country, and talking about Brexit, it became that. So it's really important that this narrative is something we look at. Now, the thing with the Conservative Party not being included in that statistic is because actually they themselves are just as split as Labour on this issue. What type of Brexit do they want? They talk about May's deal. They talk about what the ERG want. Is it what the membership wants? Is it what their voters want? So actually, they are just as confused and not unequivocally for no-deal Brexit or unequivocally for a people's vote in much the same way that some of the other minority parties and, of course, now the Brexit Party are. Now, we look at the Brexit Party and the votes that they got. Now, actually, most of the MEPs, most of the so-called gains that they made, I mean, of course they made gains. They literally cannot lose any seats because they didn't exist in 2014. So we look at the gains that the Brexit Party made. Actually, most of what they did just sucked up the UKIP voters, who actually UKIP's vote tanked in this election purely because of the Brexit Party and their populist rhetoric and the amount of money that was just thrown behind basically pushing their narrative forward.
But isn't one of the difficulties that we've had throughout this entire process is that, I don't know if they've come to take you away, Ciara, but one of the problems that we've had throughout this entire process is that any time a Brexiteer wins, any time that there's a referendum result, any time that there's a poll in favour of leaving the EU, any time Nigel Farage does well, you've got one of three arguments. Either Vladimir Putin funded it, people don't understand what they're talking about, or the vote's rigged. On this occasion, which one of those three are you coming up with?
This is really not the kind of thing we should be squibbling about. This was an election fueled by the narrative of the past few years. It's not about blaming what happened, because actually, if we take a look at these results, as I said just now, this is a good night for the people's vote, because polls show that actually, if we take a look at Labour, for example, we lost 4 times as many voters to overtly People's Vote parties and the Brexit Party. Those on the left, most in the centre of the country, are increasingly moving towards the People's Vote. This is not about maybe it was the Russians or something. It's not the kind of narrative we need to be discussing today. It's actually that if you look at it at face value, it's easy to push the line that Brexit Party had great gains, because of course they made gains. There's no way they could lose, as I just said. But actually, the night last night showed that people in this country are willing and definitely wanting to elect, vote, and throw all their support behind parties that want to remain inside the EU. So it's clear that there is a want for this in this country, and this is something we need to be discussing between you and I.
OK, just to be clear, though, you looked at the results last night and in the early hours of this morning, and you thought, whoopee-doo, this is marvellous, it's a ringing endorsement for remaining in the EU. That's what you saw when you saw those results, was it?
I mean, as a Labour member myself, I wouldn't say it's marvellous. I'd say it's a good night. A good night in terms of the narrative that we're driving. But personally, as a Labour member, I'm absolutely so disappointed to see amazing, hard-working MEPs like mine back home in the southwest lose her seat. It's clear that the narrative that we were driving on the left wasn't that was accepted by the public. But if we take a look at the vote holistically, it's good for people's vote. Now, we can easily say, oh, well, the Brexit Party won most votes, etc., etc. They didn't. It became a system of...
Well, no, hang on. They did. They got the most seats, and they got the largest number of votes and the largest percentage of votes. I mean, if the Brexit Party didn't win... By the way, I heard a commentator earlier on the TV saying the following thing. If you look at the total number of votes and you put them together and compare that with the number Brexit Party got, that means that the Brexit Party didn't win. Right, that is an utterly risible and stupid comment. So now my question's this. How much does the Brexiteer faction or the Brexiteer group, how much do we have to win by in order for you to accept the result? I mean, is it 100%, 80%, 90%? Because I've put this together. I think about this. Right, so the Brexit Party, 31.6%. The Conservative Party, 9.1%. UKIP, 3.3%. That's about 45%. You put your guys together, it's about 35%. And you're still saying you've won.
No, because if you look at the MEPs one, for example, especially now we're seeing that actually Alliance may win the third MEP seat in Northern Ireland. Remain supporting MEPs have outweighed the amount of Leave supporting MEPs. If you look at it at face value, then Remain have more MEPs in the European Parliament now.
Well, that assumes that everybody's fairly representing their own voters.
Yeah,
I mean, I meet Labour voters all the time who are absolutely incandescent with rage about the Labour Party's stance or lack of it. The Labour Party leader, Jeremy Corbyn, come on, he voted Leave. That's obvious, isn't it?
Well, I'd just like to finish my first point, if that's okay, because actually, if we take a look at the fact that this is not a completely proportional system, we aren't using STV here. Well, not in the case of Great Britain anyway. If you look at it, then who really is going to oppose the Brexit Party on no deal? Because if UKIP largely didn't campaign, actually, outside the southwest, it was more of a, we'll just hope we'll ride this wave and let Nigel Farage do his thing. Then really, who's going to oppose them? Because the Conservatives certainly are, when they're trying to actually stop all their infighting and about talking about May's deal. But when you look at Change UK trying to challenge the Lib Dems trying to challenge the Greens, and then in Scotland, the SNP trying to challenge all of them, of course you're going to have split votes there. Of course you're going to have people voting tactically because they're worried about how many seats they might win in this area and how many seats might win in another. So, of course, the Brexit Party might end up in a situation where they have a lot of votes for that one single issue because they frankly have no opposition in this election. Now, in terms of Labour, the 5 firmly pro-People's Vote parties, plus the Labour Party, which gave qualified support to the idea of the public having a final say, did win the overall majority of vote. If we include Labour, which up until this election say, oh yes, if we don't get a general election, then we'll support People's Vote, had 56% of the vote against just 44%. But I'm not going to get caught up in the maths of this here. Because, frankly, we found out this morning, of course, Labour needs to give full support to People's Vote to be able to get some kind of electoral success. And I was really pleased this happened this morning. I looked at people like Diane Abbott, John McDonnell, who's put on Twitter they will support People's Vote. We had Jeremy Corbyn recently saying that he will support it on any deal. And this is before the European elections, so we can largely count the Labour vote, which is generally in support of a People's Vote, supporting the fact that Jeremy also said he wants a People's Vote.
So, look, I'm just going to say this one thing. I mean, I think it's slightly unfair to come on and say you don't want to get caught up in the maths, given that you added all the Remain voters together to say that you'd won the election. But OK, Kira, let's just think about this. Now you have won emphatically the European elections. And remember, you won the Brexit referendum as well. It was just Putin interfering or some sort of dodgy money or electoral fraud. We all know that you won both of them, right? But now you have won them. What are you going to do next?
I mean, I think that's firstly patronising.
It was intended to be.
We're blaming our entire argument today on Putin because I think that's completely
come on, Kira, there were one or two Labour MPs, and I mean, I'm thinking of Chris Bryant.
I'm coming on speaking as myself, as my opinion.
Okay,
I'm not representing a Labour MP.
But Kira, you do have to accept that one or two people on your side have suggested that the reason why people voted to leave the EU was either Putin's interfering, electoral fraud, or the stupidity of certain voters. I mean, that's a fact, right?
Well, coming from my opinion, I don't believe that, as you put, the stupidity of voters is a problem in this. Frankly, people were lied to from both sides of the campaign, which frankly was driven by a narrative of either everything will be okay or everything's going to be absolutely chaos. So to me, as a Labour member supporting a People's Vote, I believe that this country came out of it in a worse situation because we weren't given all the facts. We now know a few years later we are in a different position. It's quite clear that we're not the same country as we were in 2016 when I was 16 and couldn't vote in this. So growing up through this situation, I've just found that actually this country has become so divided over issues that were not blamed, that were not the fault of the European Union. It's only right that any kind of democracy has the right to change its mind, especially on this issue, which is clearly proved to be such a monumental task. If this was easy, it would have happened by now.
Isn't the problem that effectively there is no consensus in favour of being governed from Brussels? And I always think actually it's constitutional theory 101, and I don't want to bore people with that, but that you cannot be ruled unless you are ruled by consent. And your hope is that sooner or later the British people will consent to this. So you kind of accept they didn't in 2016. I'm not sure what you think. Well, you probably you probably think that we won the European. But at some point,
I think it's ironic that we're talking about the fact that there's no democracy in the EU the morning after the European Union elections. I think it's ironic that we're talking about the fact we don't want to be governed by this sort of unelected elite the night after we've just seen the entire country turn out in some way to either reject voting or turn up at the polling station and vote for one reason or another. So I think that's not the issue we should be talking about now. The fact is, the state that we have across the EU, which is really important because we're now looking at a situation where we could have, say, a different president of the European Commission, who in himself could then change a direction in the EU. There is still this possibility that this could happen. Say someone like Franz Timmermans decided that he decided to be elected. So there is a situation where we do have elections in the European Parliament. That's why it's called a parliament. That's why we're here discussing the results of the elections. So the fact that we're going to sit here talking about the fact that it's an undemocratic sort of neoliberal elite is not something I think we should be considering at this stage in the game.
Well,
the fact of the night is, and in short, that it was a good night for the people's vote. Because frankly, our performance generally as an issue led to huge gains for the Liberal Democrats, huge gains from the Green Party, electing MEPs that a few years ago no one even thought would have made it to the European Parliament. We are here talking about this issue. The Labour Party have come out unequivocally in support of it this morning, which is really important as, of course, the leading opposition in Parliament. Because frankly, if we end up in a situation where we get a new Tory Prime Minister elected by the 120,000 members, who of course predominantly old white Southern men and completely not representative of the country, they won't be able to push Brexit through because Parliament's makeup, frankly, has unchanged. We will still be in the same situation. Therefore, the only way through this mess truly is a people's vote.